What's up, everybody? Marvel started their big comeback here with a little project called Wonder Man, and today I'm diving into everything from future MCU teases, including one for a tiny movie known as Avengers Doomsday, to the comic ties in the show. Let's dive in. I'm gonna go episode by episode here today and do it all at once, make it one big video, so let's not waste any time. The series began with the young Simon Williams watching the in-universe movie called Wonder Man. He's just fascinated by it, and as a fan of the MCU, I was personally fascinated by the mention of the Void. We've of course got the one from Loki and Deadpool, call it the TVA Void I guess, and the Sentry Void from Thunderbolts, but I actually think it's not a reference to either one of those things. What came to mind for me, and this was only solidified as the series went on, was that the fictional, so the movie within the show, that Wonder Man's Void was a reference to the comics, specifically Wonder Man passing away and coming back as like a zombie of sorts, thanks to Baron Zemo. I'll talk about this general idea more throughout the video, but I think Destin Daniel Cretton and Andrew Guest creatively dropped comic storylines that can't come to be in the MCU throughout this story. Regardless, they do a great job making it incredibly easy to step into Simon's shoes right out the gate with both that flashback and his time on the American Horror Story set, the overthinking of details that only matter to you and overthinking those on a detrimental level, the empty smile he has to put on right after he gets terrible news. It's immediately relatable on a universal scale, and the show got off to a great start with that. Then Simon meets the MCU legend Trevor Slattery, aka the fake Mandarin, and the show takes off from here, as this was the first of many meetings with the two. The next was at the Wonder Man remake auditions, and then once more for a drink after that. But when Simon leaves his new friend, Trevor gets a call, and it's all been part of a plan to get Simon, one involving damage control agent Cleary. I loved the first half of this episode. I was genuinely shocked by how good it was. The meta show being meta about itself really hit for me, and then the back half was just alright. But that's not the end of the world. With the first episode, it did enough to pique my interest that was rather low going into this thing. That brings us to the second episode that opened with another flashback, this one for Trevor. We see him return to LA seemingly right after the events of Shang-Chi, at least that's what I went with, and he's arrested by the FBI. But it was really damage control that wanted him, as Cleary makes his return in the physical form, and he's working directly with Trevor. His newest meta target is Simon. Which, speaking of the titular character, Simon needs Trevor's help with a self-tape for Wonder Man, and that's just perfect for Agent Cleary. But this find a shoot spot sequence, it was gold for me. It had two of my favorite moments from the show, and both come back around to play in the finale. The first is the Mandarin wardrobe in Trevor's collection. I thought it was hilarious at first, and then it ends up being crucial, and Ralph Cifaretto is a member of the MCU family. I know it's a don't meet your heroes moment in the show, but I don't care. Best cameo ever. Jokes aside, our duo made their way back to Simon's apartment after multiple locations, and Trevor got his shot to use the DODC's data exfiltration device. While that does its job, he pulls the sheet off Simon's wall, revealing the massive dent from the ionically charged episode that he had earlier in this episode, and that's where they left us with this one. I thought this was another really solid episode, and it had a damn good cliffhanger too. On top of that, Yaya and Ben Kingsley kept getting better and better. They're a phenomenal duo that makes this, and I want to be clear that I don't mean this in a bad way. They make this chaos on a small scale story so much fun. With that being said, let's get on to episode 3, which gave us an idea of Simon's MCU origin story. He's had these powers from a very young age in the cinematic universe, and I don't personally think this fire that he started at his home was the origin event. I just think it was one of his first episodes, and all of this is a departure from his comic origins, and I don't think it was a bad thing here, but I want to do a quick run through of some of my favorite moments from the few stories that I read before the show. I focused on Stan Lee's work with the character. It's something I like doing with Marvel projects when I don't really have a baseline on the character for the project, and it kills me that we can't see Simon and Baron Zemo together in the MCU. I mean, I guess we could, but I don't think we ever will, and it's a shame. There's so much fun to be had on that front. However, an element of that story that I do think we could see in the future is the whole ordeal with Simon, Vision, and Vanda. Simon's consciousness becoming a part of the Vision, the brief fling with Simon and Vanda. It's all stuff that is, kind of already set up to happen in the MCU, whether it be, kind of directly or very loosely, with Vision trying to find himself as White Vision. Vanda, I don't even know. I refuse to believe that she's gone at all. And now Simon, he's a DODC fugitive. It's a perfect mixture of chaos to bring in this next wave of chaos for the love triangle. But I guess I should focus on his comic origin too. Before Simon got his powers, he had taken over his father's business and got himself into trouble after it went south under his leadership. That landed him in prison, and it was Stark Industries who took over his business, so he was freed by the Masters of Evil and Baron Zemo, who gave him his ionic energy powers and sent him to be a spy inside the Avengers. It wasn't that simple though. Simon, now Wonder Man, was right under Zemo's thumb because he'd die without him. He told the Avengers the latter half of that story, and they tried saving him, but he eventually ends up in a coma where his body changes from flesh and blood to a pure ionic being. I thought it was a cool adaptation, even though, it is vastly different. Anyways, getting back to the show, Damage Control is pressed with their budget at risk, and so Cleary is pushing harder than ever to nail Simon. He's on his Hank Schrader. This is where I started to wonder if the agent's move to Cali wasn't by choice and it was actually punishment for getting worked by a high school girl in Jersey after getting worked by a high school guy in New York. It makes a lot of sense to me in the context of this show how so much of the action in the MCU is in New York, and so getting shipped out west as a metahuman agency agent isn't great. He's got his man on the inside with Trevor this time, though, and the former terrorist is meeting Simon's family at his mother's birthday party. We met his brother there, Eric Williams, and for those of you who don't know, he goes by another name in the comics, the Grim Reaper. That happens after Simon's coma, that seemed like his death, and I think that's for sure coming into the picture if we get a second season of the show. For one, season 2, again, if it happens, would come in the Mutant Saga, and all signs point to the DODC being a huge player for that. But most importantly, they're setting up a rift between the brothers that could very easily lead to Eric's massive grief that makes him the Reaper. Even with the finale and the reporter stuff that I'll get into in just a bit when we get to those episodes, I think that just makes it stronger. Their relationship, it's finally starting to heal, and boom, Simon's taken away. Destin Daniel Cretton and Andrew Guest, they threw Feige a fastball down the pipe. That's most likely my least far-fetched theory for this show, but getting back to Trevor, he starts to regret his deal with the DODC after he talks to Simon's mom. This was an incredible scene with Ben Kingsley and Shola Adewusi just ripe with emotion, and the turning point for Trevor, the start of his redemption, or at least the start of the wheels turning on how he was going to help Simon instead of betray him as the duo get their callbacks for the Wonder Man remake. The third episode here was just okay. It wasn't quite as good as the first two, but by no means was it bad. I was very much invested emotionally at this point, and that was really drilled home by this family episode. They were a great bunch, and I'm really high on Dimitri's Gross. After watching Banshee last year and our lead duo, they got a new environment to work in. That was the best part. Moving on to episode 4, we took a break from Simon and Trevor and spent some time with Damar Davis, aka Doorman. This would have been our 5th mutant that the MCU has introduced us to. He's a mutant in the comics, but they changed his origin to make him a Roxxon victim like most of the Defenders. His powers come from a source called the Dark Force. It's a trans-dimensional element that's been around since the 1940s, and it's been seen in that Peggy Carter series as well as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The second really dives into it, but I'm not the biggest fan of the show. It has its moments early, but it's kind of like the CWDC shows. I don't hate them, I watch them, they just overstayed their welcome. But with Doorman in the MCU, I honestly wish he was a mutant. We've had the Bear in the Black Widow movie, Miss Marvel, she was made a mutant instead of an Inhuman like she is in the comics. Mr. Immortal, he was in the She-Hulk show, and Namor in Wakanda Forever. So, not only would it have fit, kind of the intentional or unintentional pattern of random, decently popular, random, decently popular, but just give me mutants. I want them all A-list, B-list, D-list, Z-list, green eggs and ham. I want my mutants. Jokes aside, the fourth episode also solidified Josh Gad into MCU canon, and Damar ends up saving his life when the bar he worked at catches fire. He uses his powers, saves everybody inside, and that lands him a job for life with Jay Gad. He rises to stardom, gets to wear the comic accurate doorman suit in the cash grab movie, and I thought this sequence of the pre, during, and post first movie for him was an interesting commentary on one trick ponies and how it might be out of their control. Then, as they film the sequel, after Dorman's bid has run its course and he's down bad, shit goes wrong on set. Damar was hungover from both the liquor and the nightmare he had. Probably because of the liquor, he's no Jim Leahy after all, and Jay Gad just disappears inside of him. He finally got the break he needed after that initial pop, and it was gone in the blink of an eye. I thought this episode had some interesting elements to it, but to quote Doorman's agent, this was downhill. Now, one thing I really liked was how it served as, kind of a potential preview of sorts for what could happen to Simon, but even with that, I was ready to just get back to Simon and Trevor after 10 minutes of this flashback bridge. That's the money duo. Thankfully, we got right back to them, to the DODC, and to the present in episode 5. We saw the agent who was the lead on the doorman case, and now he's the deputy director of damage control. This kind of continued that mirroring that episode 4 did, only for Agent Cleary this time. He could rise through the ranks if he gets Simon, if he finally gets a target, and maybe that's something that is set up in Brand New Day. After all, Tremel Tillman is rumored to be the head of the DODC in that movie. Maybe the agency is going to need a new leader for the future. Either way, our duo ran into a new problem as some of Trevor's old buddies, I use that term very lightly, found them at a bar. We finally got to see Simon's powers on display a bit more here, and it's so cool how they display his flesh. Although I shouldn't call it flesh because it's ionized organic matter now, and the VFX they decided to go with to bring that to life was brilliant. Then after the fight, they noticed somebody saw them, and this was a trippy moment for me personally. I waited to watch Wonder Man until the weekend, and I'm also on season 5 of my Breaking Bad rewatch, so I basically went from the Todd train robbery celebration scene to this, and it's the same. I mean, not the same, obviously, but it's the same vibe, and I just thought it was crazy that it lined up so I watched both of these two in the same day. On top of that, this episode had a great moment that I demand, we have a serious discussion about it. With Simon and Trevor, which one of them is Beavis and which one is Butthead? I feel like it's in the order that I just said it. Simon is Beavis, he's, the energetic idiot of the two, and Trevor is Butthead, the laid back idiot. But Trevor, he does have his history with drugs, which is Pete Cornholio. This might be the most important debate in the history of mankind, so let me know what you think down in the comments below. Getting back to reality, chaos erupts for our duo with the Wonder Man director Von Kovac moving the callback up right as a shootout ensues at a Tik Tok candy house. This is that chaos on a small scale that I was talking about, and this was another great cliffhanger, and it was also at the end of this episode that I felt confident saying that the binge release was the right choice here, and for good reasons too. Jumping to episode 6, we picked up with Simon and Trevor on their way to the audition, and as we saw that, we got Trevor's audition from way back in the day for the Mandarin. He was in the middle of his addiction and just doing whatever he could to fuel it, just like how he's doing anything he can to stay out of prison to fuel that addiction to freedom that he found with his pal Morris. But once they've done the first round at the director's home, we got a fascinating scene. It's when Simon falls asleep. It's presented as a real scene, but it's a nightmare. I think it would have been so good if they did it without the Mortal Kombat finishing move, obviously, and had it as a real scene. I know it was, like Simon beating himself up subconsciously. It just felt like the perfect timing for that scene in the real show. Then it's like, oh, it was fake. Anyways, our duo get cast after a strong second round of auditions for the director. They're Wonder Man and Barnaby, Von Kovac's perfect duo, but the meta on meta is despite their shared success and Trevor's change of heart, there's a massive stain on what appears to be the perfect friendship, the perfect duo, the up-and-comer who can't get his break, and the veteran trying to make a comeback after his controversy. They just gotta work together. I gotta be honest, this was another weird episode for me. Probably my least favorite of the show. When it's all said and done, it felt like 5 and 6, they could have been a good one episode duo because 6, it ended up feeling like a glass of milk from episode 5, where 5 was a full glass of milk, and 6, it's a glass of milk where half is water because you ran out of milk. It looks the same, but once you consume it, you notice the difference. From there, let's get to episode 7, where we saw another piece of Simon watching the OG Wonder Man movie inside the show for the first time with his dad, and that took us to day one on the set of the Wonder Man movie remake inside the Wonder Man show. The duo's got a big New York Times interview lined up. Whoop-de-doo, Basil, and Simon's not looking forward to it. He's got secrets that Trevor doesn't. But then, funny enough, the interviewer Kathy ends up being more of a problem for Trevor than Simon. She had more to pick at with his dirty laundry being public, and the whole situation forces him to tell the truth. Simon finally found a friend and a great colleague, and he was assigned to him. That pushes him over the edge, and he destroyed the entire shooting warehouse and the set for the movie. This was also another scene where I felt the Grim Reaper set up for the future of the MCU. Eric gives a glowing review about his brother to the reporter, and you realize it's not an absence of love with the brothers, it's communication difficulties, it's misdirected frustration and anger, which feels like the ideal setup to adapt that grief driven story. Regardless, I thought this was unfortunately another weird episode, despite the strong finish going into the finale. That's part of the reason I say weird and not bad. It's the vibe that's off in some of these episodes. It was just so damn good in those first couple, episode 5 2, and that was absent here in 6 and 7, 4 as well. I went from riding high with the boys, Simon and Trevor, to just hoping they would somehow land the ship in one piece. With that being said, let's get on to our final episode, and the opening scene here was heartbreaking, but in a sort of bittersweet way, it was a return to form after those episodes I wasn't the biggest fan of. We got a flashback where Simon's told he has no limits on his potential, and when he started to climb, he fell right back down. The doorman future is creeping up on him. It would have gotten him too. He'd be in a Supermax facility right now, but Trevor found his way to make things right. He takes the blame for the incident on set, putting the Mandarin drip back on and becoming the terrorist once again. This was an insane twist. I thought he was going to be too late to act, but the theory it sparked for me might be even more insane. This is where this little show would connect to another small movie called Avengers Doomsday, and it's with a line of dialogue. First, I gotta set the stage. RDJ, he's coming back as Doctor Doom after thriving as Iron Man, and Trevor, he was of course the Mandarin for Iron Man 3. So, what if the Trevor was the act, I was always the Mandarin, is meant to mirror what we're gonna hear from RDJ as Doctor Doom? I might be crazy, but I think there's something here. Destin, he was connected to direct Kang Dynasty, the first Avengers movie of the multiverse saga, before it was changed to Doomsday, so he'd know about those changes behind the scenes, and that also means that he has Feige's trust to be on a movie that big. It just feels right. Either way, Simon returned to set the next day, and after a bizarre conversation with Von Kovac, we got the modern comic accurate Wonder Man suit, the OG movie that showed off the old school suit from the comics. Well, one of them, there's one where he kind of looks like a Sergeant Rock in this one, if you ask me, but he's had a couple of looks over the years, nothing crazy for a comic book character, but I will say his modern look is probably my favorite for him, this or that Sergeant Rock one that I mentioned. Then Simon also rocked another one of Wonder Man's comic looks at the movie's red carpet. They just found ways to show love across the board for the character's history while solidifying their own version, and it's another one of those things that just works with the way they crafted this series. But then I almost spit out my non-existent drink when Joey Pants shows up as Barnaby in the movie. Ralphie stole the Mandarin's role, and they used him so well in this show. After that, we jumped about a year in time, and Simon's out on a mission to get his boy back. I guess you could say he's doing his own stunts. He uses his fame to get in with a guard from the DODC Supermax prison, gains easy access to Trevor, walking right past Agent Cleary as he mentions Wonder Man's ionic powers that I've told you about throughout the video, and he breaks Trevor out. We've got ourselves some DODC fugitives on the West Coast, and we got ourselves a sword fugitive on the West Coast. I smell a new team coming to the MCU. Maybe I'll make another video solely focused on that, how it could work, but I've run out of tinfoil with this one. It was really a solid finale capping off a bumpy ride that had three things for me carrying the load. The meta show being meta about itself, Yaya and Ben Kingsley, they were just amazing immediately, one of my favorite MCU duos, and how they blended Wonder Man's comic history with both versions of the character, the fiction within the fiction, and just the fiction. It was all masterful, and this show was just a pleasant surprise at the end of the day. And so that's going to do it for my Wonder Man breakdown and review, but I want to know what your favorite episode was and what you thought about the entire show, so let me know down in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's video, smash that like button on your way out, and make sure you have a great day.